Welcome back to Melbourne Property TV. On tonight's panel, we're discussing buying a property prior to auction or through private sale. There's a whole lot of questions to be answered from WBP Property Group, Phil Manning.
Thank you.
From the REIV, Robert Larocca, and of course Tim Fletcher from Fletchers Real Estate.
G'day.
Now, this is a tough thing, because if you're not going to auction, what's the strategy, do you think, from your point of view? I guess you're trying to bring two parties together before an auction?
Well, look, I think if a seller agrees to go to auction, they should really, from the outset, determine that that's what is going to happen. Now, that's not to stop a property being sold beforehand, but it's my firm view, and I've seen this over the years where auctions have been mucked up, because if you as an agent try and sell a property before auction and you don't sell it before auction, why would you as a buyer go and compete on the day? It doesn't make sense. That doesn't mean, as I said, you can't sell it before. Plenty get sold before, because someone opens their mouth fairly wide and negotiations start. But it can get a bit messy too doing that. It's very interesting, the whole psychology of this auction process, from the seller's point of view and the buyer's point of view.
And from the buyer's point of view, I actually agree that I think it's far better to go to the auction and buy the property at the auction. I'm not always opposed to buying prior to auction, but I think the auction process in Melbourne is so transparent. You're at the auction, so long as you've got your preparation work done around how much you're comfortable to pay, the value of the property, and you've had some really good advice. You can stand at the auction, you can see the bids being made, they're real people, you can see the denominations they're coming in and how fast they're coming, and you can make judgments on their body language.
But people fear an auction a bit though, don't they? They fear that they're going to get caught up in some sort of bidding frenzy. And do you have clients saying, we want to make an offer, we want to offer them something?
We do, and in some cases we do that. But in most cases, the advantage of making an offer prior to auction are outweighed by the advantage of waiting for the auction. You can reveal an awful lot about your position. You can give a lot of information back to the selling agent, who, after all, is representing the vendor in the process.
The good thing about auctions is they determine the value of the property for you. People are often worried when they're making an offer for a private sale or for an auction prior to the day. Am I offering the right amount? Is it too little? Is it too much? How do I know? The good thing about the auction is it tells you that. The market tells you that. You go, as you make the point, you can see, you know what the market's going to offer, and that is establishing the true value of that. As long as you know how far you are willing to go as a buyer, you won't get in trouble.
So when does it work, buying before auction? When someone's got a clear-cut, reasonable idea of what the property's worth, and the vendor says, I'd like to do that and not have the stress of an auction?
Look, it works when you can actually negotiate this transaction in a very transparent way. I agree with Phil. It is much more transparent at auction, but nevertheless there are sales before. And really, you know, do you bring them into the office and open envelopes, the highest offer, or do you have a private auction? How do you handle it? It's awfully difficult. So really, unless you're encouraged by the agent to make an offer because you're told it's going to sell before, I would wait until the auction.
Are you obliged to present all offers?
Oh yes, absolutely. Every offer you get. And look, there are plenty of occasions with an auction whereby a person will make a proposition that the vendor's not really thinking of selling before and not really desirous of doing it, and they actually bring it onto the market, and by that I mean the seller says, well look, I'm pretty attracted to that, let's get all the other people in, and it can get messy at times.
That's right, but I think it's important from a buyer or a buyer's advocate at this point is to really establish whether or not that the offer that has been given to the selling agent is acceptable. That's really important. That's the first thing. An agent will come to us and say, look, I've got an offer on this property and I know you've got some interest in it. First thing I need to establish is, well, is that offer going to be accepted by the vendor? And if it is, then we need to establish what the rules of our engagement are from that point. Now, Tim points out there are a number of options. There's the envelopes and there's the phone call, the highest, the best offer by 6 p.m, and then there's the boardroom auction, which really is probably the best way of handling those situations.
Yeah. And those offers, it's not just as simple as price. I mean, when you're making that offer prior to an auction, it's about terms as well. It's not just, I'll give you this amount of money, it's what will the settlement terms be, because that can be part of an attractive feature toward the vendor. They may want a quick sell.
All right. Well, now moving on then to private sales, because there is no auction in the picture. Now, how does the buyer handle it from that point of view? And I guess
Well, I think the most important thing, again, at the start, if we go back to the auction that became a private sale, the starting point is really what are the rules of engagement? How will this be handled by selling agent and vendor? And how much time will we have if we make an offer? Will we be given the chance to make a counter offer if someone else becomes involved? You know, and how transparent will that process be?
Because the obvious fear for someone is that there's offers you're being told that there's other offers, and people...
Exactly, but you've got to really you've got to have done your homework and have a really clear idea about the value of the property. You really should have taken some advice. I mean, the minute you engage with a property, you really haven't got the luxury of waiting. You need to establish the value. You need to have that in your mind just in case you get that call.
Look, I think it's important to point out here there are two fundamental ways of selling a place privately in terms of price. One is to have a specific number that the property gets sold at, and the other is where it's expressions of interest, called a whole range of things, and there's no specific price. If there is a price on the property and someone thinks it's worth it, they might negotiate below to see if they can get it a bit less than the asking price. But I've said to people over the years, if you think it's worth that, pay it. Because so often people haggle and then find they've missed out because they didn't believe the agent or some other event happened. And they've missed out. If there's no specific price, it's putting your toe in the water, and I agree entirely with Phil, work out whether the vendor is prepared to sell at that stage, because it may be that a few other people come into the equation, and determine your strategy from there. Don't be too low, because psychologically the vendor says, I don't want anything to do with those people. They're offending me. But if you're too high, of course, I think it's worse to be too low than too high.
Do you like vendors to put, when they're selling property, to say, here's a range or here's a price we want for this property?
Well, a vendor will have an idea of what they're prepared to sell, but when you've got a sort of unique type of property that maybe should be auctioned but the vendor doesn't want to do it, you'll do it another way. So really, we're all testing the market to see what ultimately the place is worth. It's not an exact science, this. A lot of people think it is. It really has to be determined. There's not one identical property that you'll find out there in the marketplace. They're all a bit different.
And I mean, the private sale discussion is very relevant. I mean, somewhere between 70 and 75% of homes in Melbourne are actually sold by private sale. Auctions take the limelight because they happen every weekend and they provide numbers that people can look at. But most people are buying and selling at private sale. So, that advice about putting your best foot forward, offer what you really want to pay for that property, because you may not get the second option.
There may be other things you could do. You may set time limits on your offers. But I think that's really important to know what sort of a time limit to set, and you can discuss that in conjunction with the selling agent. I mean, that's part of the information you need to gain from him. How long is the vendor local? Is he contactable easily? So you don't want to be. I mean, a time limit on an auction, you've got to remember, is a time limit on your own negotiation as well as the vendors.
How many people have said to you, "That's it, I'm not paying any more"?
Oh, lots.
And the agent says, OK, I'll take them on face value, sells it to someone else, and then they ring and abuse you for that. It's only playing a game. That's why, if you're not sure about it, get someone like Phil's organisation to negotiate for you. They know what they're doing, they do it professionally, and they look after you. The agent selling for the vendor looks after the seller.
We might leave it there, Tim. Thank you very much. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Robert.